important basic point is the special independent counsel, Mr. Fisk, Republican, has concluded his investigation of Foster's death and the issue of the contacts between the White House, the Treasury, and the RTC. He has concluded that Foster committed suicide, and also, and I quote, that the evidence is insufficient to establish that anyone within the White House or the Department of Treasury acted with the intent to corruptly influence an RTC investigation, end of quote. The third point that I think we are concerned about today, and that indicates that there were, in fact, as I understand it, over 40 contacts between the White House staff, the Treasury, and the RTC staff. And I think the bottom line is that the American people do want to make certain that charges against Madison Guaranty were treated by the RTC in exactly the same ways that they would be treated if that bank had no connection to a man who was elected president. Therefore, I think this hearing is appropriate, and I think that it is useful. Although Mr. Fisk has concluded that there is no basis for criminal prosecution, it is absolutely appropriate that we learn as much as we can from you in terms of those discussions and those contacts. You yourself, as I understand it, Mr. Cutler, have called that, quote-unquote, poor judgment, and will want to know how we can prevent such behavior in the future. Mr. Chairman, the issue that I want to raise, and I know that Mr. Cutler is familiar with this issue. I don't believe we've talked about it today, and by no means am I making any derogatory statements about anybody on this committee. But what concerns me very, very much is there are individuals who, on nationwide radio and television, have disseminated unfounded accusations that I think nobody on this committee believes, and I'm not suggesting that anyone does, but unfounded accusations that have gone so far as to even suggest that the President of the United States and Mrs. Clinton are involved in murder, are involved in thuggery, and in arson. And these are not just little people who are talking, some little splinter group. These are people who are on national radio, national television, making these statements. And I am very concerned about these types of vicious political attacks. Now, to my mind, what goes on there is not simply an effort to undermine the presidency of Bill Clinton. That's what politics is about, and that's the game we play. But what those people are doing, Mr. Chairman, are really undermining the faith of the American people in the democratic process. I disagree. I'm an independent. I disagree with Mr. Clinton all the time. So do the Republicans. So do all of us. But if you have people speaking to millions of Americans who are saying that the President of the United States and Mrs. Clinton are involved in murder, are involved in arson, are involved in thuggery, and that's what millions of people are hearing, what are those people to believe about the United States government? Why should they participate in the political process? Why should they vote? This concerns me very much. So my questions to you, Mr. Cutler, are basically twofold. Number one, tell us, in your judgment, the worst example of what you refer to as poor judgment. There's been a lot of poor judgment. What is the worst? And second of all, if you can say a word as to how the White House or how you are responding or feel about these outrageous allegations, which again, I want to repeat, I believe nobody in this committee believes. Those are my two questions.
Well, with respect to poor judgment, Mr. Sanders, as I've said before, second-guessing after the event is always very easy. I wasn't there at the time, and I'm sure the people who were there acted in complete good faith. But I think myself that the question of whether Mr. Altman should recuse himself was a question he should have decided without consulting the White House, and that it was too bad that the White House people involved indicated to him they rather hoped he wouldn't. They had a preference that he wouldn't. They may have had perfectly good reasons for that. My own view is that once the matter came up, it would have been better, and I believe what I would have done at the time is say, go ahead and recuse, that given the political and factual circumstances of Whitewater at the time, it would have been better to recuse, and we might not be here in this hearing today. I might still be practicing law instead. With respect to these attacks on President and Mrs. Clinton, they have reached a level of invective and viciousness, if you'll let me say that, that is unparalleled, a new low. Level is probably the wrong word, a low unparalleled, at least in my experience in the government, that goes all the way back to World War II. I'm sure there have been other periods in American history when other presidents have been vilified and we've survived it. But this seems to be very well financed. It's a cottage industry. There are a great many people apparently who would like to bring President Clinton down, who will stop at practically nothing. I talked earlier about trust. I really deplore the lack of trust of one party for another, of the public for the president, of the press for anyone in public office today. I think we've reached a low that should make us ashamed of ourselves. It's one thing for the press and anyone exercising First Amendment rights to be able to say what he wants about an administration, and it's good for us. But I come back, as I said the other day, to Mr. Joseph Welch's statement when he was counsel for the Secretary of the Army dealing with Senator McCarthy, "Have you no decency?" And I think it's something of which we should all remind ourselves.
Thank you. Time with the gentleman has expired. Mr. Grams.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cutler, of course, thank you for coming today and presenting your testimony for us. What we have witnessed today was an impressive presentation by an impressive attorney about a less impressive client, and unfortunately that client is the President of the United States and his administration, an administration that he promised would be the most ethical one in American history. Now, for the next 2 weeks, we must try and determine whether this administration, in holding White House Treasury meetings over the Madison investigation, has met that standard or has even come close. We are not here to examine the criminality of such actions that has already been done by the Fisk investigation. We are here to determine, as representatives of the people, whether the White House Treasury contacts involved unethical or inappropriate behavior. And by the way, that is just the beginning, because this hearing represents only